So this is my game. You kill enemies, get their weapons, and then use it against them. So recently, to get opinions in, I showed someone my game where they killed an enemy and said, "Is that it?" And I was like, yeah. And that made me realize the amount of time I've spent developing this, and I've only made a literal 10-second demo. And so I thought, to fix that, you know what this game needs? More unique weapons. And do you know who's making the weapons? So, starting from now, I'll be adding some new weapons and some other content to stop my game from being, well, just this. And into something you guys can play with a demo in the description. So, I started by fixing one of the biggest features of the game, and that was that the enemies were suspiciously silent. So, obviously, I had to get them talking. But as I've said a million times now, I hate UI, so of course the text box started glitching. But once I had it working, it was pretty cool. Or maybe they shouldn't really have the ability to talk. Also, since some of the weapons I add don't even look like weapons, my test subject was confused. So to help with this, I added a pickup button to pick weapons up and a talk button to help with readability. So, boring stuff aside, it was time to start making my first new weapon, which was going to be a pan with food in it. It was originally going to be a stir fry, but I didn't know how to add different food bullets, which then led me on to adding eggs as bullet, but these looked weird, so I ended up on shrimp. Don't ask. And considering there are multiple shrimps in one pan, I decided to add burst to this weapon, which is a new combo to add to the previous traits, which obviously include bouncing, exploding, and gravity. And of course, as well as the burst, the shrimp are going to be affected by gravity, which results in a weapon that looks like this and is burst and gravity. I never intended to have a burst when making the game, so when I added it, it was pretty scuffed. So as a result, I discovered you could drop the weapon while it was shooting, and then it would just continue. Like a bit of a shrimp turret, if you can see that. Which could be a cool feature, but it did end up getting patched later anyway. A couple of you guys suggested a couple more movements for Jabb, which I slightly agree, as it could help with dodging bullets better. So I added a crouch, which was an instant no, because this wasn't even gonna help with dodging. Then I realized, hold on, its legs are so small, its crouch just doesn't even make any sense. However, dashing on the other hand made a bit more sense. It's just a small boost, and as you can see, it makes you move a lot more quicker. However, there's one issue that still affects me to this day, and that is I don't know how to make it sticky key proof. And so, I don't even really use it because, yeah, it just keeps popping up. Yeah, bad dev. And overall, I'm not as much of a fan of doing too much to the movement, as once again, I just want to keep it simple. The background still looks borderline crap, so I experimented a bit. Firstly, since it's a cave, turning all the lights off, which did not hit, yeah. Then, as a bit of detail, a rope in the background, which doesn't look too bad. Hopefully adding tiny things like these can save the background. But what helped the most was the parallax. This was actually pretty fun to play around, creating some trippy results. But the result I settled on was pretty unnoticeable, with this small background element. Anyway, the next crucial system, as my test subject pointed out, is that you can't even die. So, let's finally add a health system. So my original thought was, why not just put it in the corner? But that was very ugly. So, I added it on top of the player, and it was pretty clean. Could you die yet? No. But there was also a pretty cool passive heal ability. The thinking behind this is that there's no point worrying about finding heals, you can just dodge bullets. Because if you're good enough, you can heal in combat. The enemies also had the same health bar, which fades in when they lose HP for the first time. Well, they only had 2 HP, and every weapon dealing the same damage made the shrimp pan move like Vaughn with its burst. Also, not to mention, with the shrimp now bursting, the screen becomes even more cluttered when fighting enemies. Anyway, then it was time to do some UI, which included a pause screen, which allowed taking breaks from this game, which still had the length of about 10 seconds. Anyway, I designed this pause menu, which in my opinion, it's pretty cool. Although, maybe it just looks like a mobile game. This, I then animated and then paused the game with it. With it sliding, doesn't look too bad. I then finally added dying. It is one of the uglier parts since it just does this weird phase. But, it's just as ugly for the enemies. Yeah, great. To add to the pause screen, I also added a title screen, which included, of course, the name, but also the version, which is Zeta. I just thought it wasn't really an alpha or beta, so just use the Z version, which sounds cool, but if you do see Zeta, it just means the game is in a very early stage. Also featured is this new character, who is actually pretty chill in game because he's an NPC rather than an enemy. And for the cover art is kinda the star. And a bit of lore, he is affiliated with the mines since he has that hat. Anyway, I had the title screen in game, and with this effect, the title screen was low-key better than the game. Yeah. Bro. Okay. Alongside this, I had this kind of icon for the game, which looks nice. Then, one of the weapons I designed was scary. It was the pain machine, which as you can tell would be a nightmare in real life, which is pretty evident by the tattoo it has on its side. The idea for this would be it would kind of act like a pistol when I add it in. Now I'm gonna let you guys in on some lost media. So basically, in the last video, I didn't include it, but there was a whole vertical area in the map if you kept going. Pretty huge, right? It was also a bundle of joy to work on, yeah. As to do it, I had to solve a bunch of questions. Firstly with the camera and also with backtracking. The backtracking issue is that I want you to always be able to complete it backwards in case you have a weapon you left behind and you want to pick it up. With verticality, this becomes very hard is all I'll say. I tried adding this mushroom, but like, you can tell how desperate I was when I was adding bouncy mushrooms to help backtracking. And for the camera, it seems simple, but I had to add like camera checkpoints all for this ugly transition. Anyway, for those reasons, I wasn't sure if I was going to add it, but I'm going to let it become lost media as I realized like this wasn't even going to be fun for the player. Anyway, whining aside, I just flattened the level and just made it a bit of a straight line in which I could start developing a bit of a level. Obviously, I needed to teach the player the ropes, but I didn't want to add a wall of text. Partially because players don't really want to read, but also because I couldn't be asked to write anything. So instead, to teach the player, I made the starting area empty with one weapon, which they will be intrigued, so they pick it up and realize, oh, this is an RPG. Well, they may not be that dumb, but like, it's an RPG. Anyway, hopefully avoiding the lava. Going to the right, they encounter the first enemy they can find, the miner, in which they find out they can take damage and deal damage, and that they need to dodge projectiles. Once killing them, their weapon will be dropped, which is weird, but they know it's a weapon as they just got shot at. Then hovering over it, they will find out they can actually swap weapons and choose their preference, and that'll be the hook for the game, hopefully. Then they'll shoot at the next enemy, who they can't kill, because getting closer they realize it's just an NPC, and that they exist. Then going forward, they will meet more weapons and more NPCs and more enemies, and that'll be the game. Or they have common sense, or I've just watched this video, so this actually does make sense. Designing a tutorial without it being a tutorial was pretty cool though. Anyway, for this to happen, I deleted the starting area I had, and deleted the blue guys, and replaced them with soft hats, who are the miners who are now in the game. Which also has the gold mining NPC, who just casually mines gold. Why is he mining gold? Lore. I also don't know, I'm not gonna lie. The level does also go to the side quite a bit. It does feel pretty barren though. Then the next enemy was created, which was the bat enemy. This was because I wanted a moving enemy to help increase difficulty, and bats move in caves. So yeah. But it is also associated to the cave by the hat. Once I added in the game, they can either stand still or they can move about. The speed was accidental on this occasion, but it was so hard to hit, it made me realize this could be a late game fight as it was quite difficult, and this could help as the game is sometimes easy for me, so this was a nice source of difficulty. It also has a small hitbox, so hitting it mid-air with gravity guns is pretty difficult. even when it's standing still. The next NPC was also added, the Ghost.
As a child, I yearned for the mines.
Who do I even have to explain what happened to him? It has a floating animation and just floats and chills. Then it was time for the pain machine's inclusion, and it kind of acted like the stick except a quicker fire rate, and kind of replaced the stick in the demo, as the stick is basically extinct now. As the name would suggest, of course when I added it to the game it was OP, and I'm not even kidding. The issue came from the fact that it was like the stick and had no gravity, and you could just rapidly kill things from off screen and just run through the entire level. And also, since every bullet did the same amount of damage, it was just the same thing as if the RPG was an LMG. So I fixed both of these issues, firstly by limiting the pain machine's range and the bullets expiring after not a lot of time in the air. So funnily enough, I realized they were shorter to mid-range guns now, as now you need to come closer with this weapon to kill enemies, but that also gets you more into the action, which was pretty cool. To fix the other issue, I revamped the damage levels and gave enemies 40 HP and changed all the weapons to do appropriate damage, which means the RPG would 2-tap an enemy versus the pain machine where it takes 3 or 4 hits. This, however, meant that Shrimp Pan got hit hard and is now the weakest weapon in the game, and something I don't really care to buff, so RIP. I then went around placing the 3 enemies I had all over this map in weird ways to eventually get a bit of a demo level. One thing that annoyed me was when dying you would send me all the way back, so to counter this you can come across a checkpoint halfway which you respawn at if you die. This led to the funny consequence that initially when respawning you have no weapon, and so unless you go all the way back to the start you are cooked because you can't really kill the enemies. So it made me realize I need to drop a starter weapon at checkpoints. It made me realize whether I should just sprinkle the weapons you find on the floor randomly throughout the level. This also had the side consequence of being a funny way to make the game harder by starting you off with a bad weapon at a checkpoint and leaving you to try trade up. Once the enemies were sorted all with their own HPs, I then added a tunnel at the end with all the items I had been working with, and in that way Blue Guy was still in the demo, and also the stick is still there, which funny enough is now the most OP weapon here. I then added music to the game, adding 2 tracks. Also, I know I haven't added many weapons in this devlog, but I have been designing, so maybe you'll see these 2 weapons soon, or maybe not. One interesting thing about this project is the amount of game design questions it's throwing at me, especially how do we avoid camping, considering the enemies can do everything that you can do, but the player is more skilled than brainless enemies. So limiting the range on straight bullets helps, as gravity also have a range limit, so that makes you get closer. I think adding some sort of turret that always keeps you moving is probably a good idea, or just maybe very annoying. I will however admit I skipped out on a couple features that do need to be added soon, such as dying animations, sound effects, and more balancing and polish. But with that, I exported and uploaded it to itch and gave it this nice page. Anyway, with the build uploaded to itch, give it a play, join the Discord, or comment what improvements I could do and how to dopamine max it and how to make it fun, because yeah, I'm just trying to make this fun as possible. Because after uploading the build, I've already changed the movement quite a bit, and as for the future, I need to find a way to make levels quickly and hopefully a Steam page. Yeah, hope you enjoyed, and goodbye. I actually don't know. Yeah. FNAF floor. Oh, don't, no, we're not talking about FNAF on here.